On today's Star Wars Legends lore video, we cover one of the only ugly starfighters, which might not get you killed, at least right away. Roll the intro. Today's video is kindly sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, and for those who don't know, Raid is a brand new collection-based RPG that is blowing up right now with almost 10 million players worldwide in just 3 months. Raid has great graphics, strategic gameplay, huge boss fights, an amazing storyline, and over 400 champions for you to collect and customize. My favorite is Galak because I like his flow and his AoE attacks, but all the champions look great. The game is free to play, it features PvP, PvE, and a variety of modes with something for everyone. Personally, I just like PvE because I'm not that competitive. Either way, the game is free to play and super fun. You don't have to take my word for it because it has over 200,000 reviews and almost a perfect score on Google Play. Raid's also just been updated and now has a new awesome loyalty reward program for new players. And if you sign up now, you can get a new daily reward for your first 90 days. So what are you waiting for? Go to the video description, click the link, and you will get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as part of the new player program. Good luck, and I'll see you there. Ugly starfighters are known across the galaxy for being, well, pretty crappy. They're essentially bits and pieces of different fighters thrown together in desperation when an entire working ship isn't otherwise available. So maybe you've got a pilot of TIE fighter wings scrapped from crashed fighters, then a few X-wings or Y-wing fuselages, add some glue, and baby, you got yourself a stew going. It's pretty clear why this didn't work out very well. You're taking ships with different purposes and specializations, and basically jerry-rigging a Frankenstein machine, usually complete with major performance loss and maintenance issues. In fact, the ugly known as the TIE Wing is probably the worst starfighter of all time, combining the ball cockpit and weapons of a TIE with the engines of a Y-Wing, essentially taking the two worst aspects of both. So you have the Y-Wing's poor speed and maneuverability with the poor shielding and armaments of the TIE. It's a death box that should literally only be used when nothing else is available, and maybe even not then. However, not all Uglies were so terrible. The Death Raven, for example, was basically two B-wings strapped together, but ended up being more of a freighter rather than a fighter, and there are other examples of ships that worked just fine. Still, good or bad, Uglies were generally only used when a faction could not afford to either buy new or used fighters off the market or produce their own. The best, or at least most functional Uglies were those designed with the uniformity, purpose, and knowledge of the key aspects of the constituent fighters. So if you're having a ship based off the Y-Wing, you want one that doesn't need speed. If you're starting from an unshielded TIE fighter, then maintaining maneuverability is probably going to be key. With all that being said, in my opinion, the best Star Wars ugly starfighter was the Twi'lek Tradoc II. Now, there were never any official pictures of this craft, so you'll have to use the power of imagination. Still, I'll try to paint a picture. The Chir'daki was an incredibly unique and surprisingly useful ugly. Invented sometime during the Galactic Civil War, and perhaps after Endor, the Chir'daki was a Twi'lek fighter built on Ryloth and perhaps other planets. Its first known exposure to the rest of the galaxy was in 7 ABY, when Wedge Antilles and other Rogue Squadron members liaised with the Twi'lek. Here's Wedge's first impression of the craft, and a general description of the ugly from the Krytos trap. In 3 pairs came a half-dozen Uglies. The X-Wing fighter's distinctive S-foils jutted out from the sides of a TIE fighter's ball cockpit. The stabilizers had been fastened to a collar that surrounded the cockpit, and as the fighters maneuvered and cavorted in the air above the assembly, he saw the S-foils rotating around the cockpit, making the design similar in principle to that of the B-Wing fighter in service with the Alliance. So if you couldn't tell from the brief description there, their Chir'daki is pretty weird, but what's more, it strains the definition of what can be considered an ugly. Although it's mostly made up of the main body of a TIE fighter and the wings of an X-Wing, it also used a new standardized part, the sort of connective collar. And what's more, all Chir'dakas were of completely uniform design with little to no part deviation. So essentially you have a ball cockpit, a collar surrounding it, then wings which can rotate freely around and open and close like normal S-foils. And I'll include some fan artwork with credit to all down in the description. The collar is actually, in my opinion, the most interesting part. Not only could the wings fully rotate around a stationary cockpit, but other systems including landing gear were also included within, giving the fighter a bit more functionality. Another interesting feature of this Ugly was the way it used redundant systems. The TIE's powerful ion engines propelled the craft, while the engines of the X-Wing, which remember are situated on the S-foils, were used to power shields, hyperdrive, and other weapons, essentially adding extra power to the base TIE design. And yes, you heard me correctly, this fighter did have a hyperdrive, unlike the base TIE, although it did not have any sort of life support, so pilots were required to be in an enclosed vac suit. The collar gave the fighter extra maneuverability and stability, while also helping with laser targeting, and even Wedge could not help but be impressed upon seeing the Chir'daki. The Twi'lek agreed, with the name of the fighter actually translating to Death Seed in BASIC. The Death Seed are the Drock from Nom Chorios, and were named as such because, and I quote, "it recalls the spores of a parasitic fungus that invades a larger creature and destroys it. Most unpleasant, as would be facing our Chir'daki in combat." The major weakness of the ship was the lack of torpedo launchers, limiting the Chir'daki in both anti-starfighter and anti-capital ship combat. However, the TIE cockpit does not have launchers, and on the X-Wing they are connected to the fuselage rather than the wings, thus it would be too expensive to independently both secure the launcher apparatuses and the munitions itself, and with that kind of cost you're sort of defeating the point of an Ugly in the first place. This, however, worked perfectly for Rogue Squadron, who took on at least one squad of Death Seeds and their Twi'lek pilots during the Bacta War, and that's because they were already extremely limited on funds and were having a tough time replacing ordnance, so they probably couldn't have afforded to arm the launchers even if they did exist. More on that point, Chir'daki were loaned to Rogue Squadron during the Bacta War as a way to help prove the Twi'lek as a fighting force. They were led by the warrior pilot Taldria, and although they lacked missiles, they were useful in both space combat and ground raids, including the attack on Crew 25 and the capture of the Lusankya. They were instrumental as well in assisting with the destruction of the Corruptor Victory Star Destroyer, providing cover for the X-Wings of Rogue Squadron, and were just generally very effective fighters. They never seemed like a burden, and always kept up with the Rogues, which is very impressive given the fact, again, that these are hobbled together fighters. That being said, their pilots generally did take more casualties. As a brief recap, Chir'daki were shielded, decently well armed, and even more maneuverable than a TIE fighter. They were, however, slower. One thing to note is that it seems like the TIE's internal power supply drove the engines, which perhaps means that a pilot is unable to shift energy between the X-Wing powered components like the energy and shields to the engines, although it's possible that there is some sort of connected internal system. This tactic of power shift specifically between the lasers, shield, and engines was a key tactic vital to many New Republic starfighters, and gave the craft some extra versatility and adaptability. Another question I have is, why didn't the starfighter also use the two cannons on the TIE? My guess is that they were seen as redundant, and all available power was instead sent to the engines. But that's all I have to say about what I believe to be the best Ugly Starfighter in Star Wars Legends. Is there a different starfighter that you've picked out? What do you think of the Chir'daki? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. Before we leave though, we do have a question of the day from Whiskey Docent, who asked, were you ever subscribed to Star Wars Kids magazine, and if so, what's your opinion on the novels and comics that came with each issue? So unfortunately no, I never was subscribed, and with Star Wars Legends, I only ever had bits and pieces as a kid. It was very rare that I could get a whole collection at once, and I remember specifically with Young Jedi Knights, I would just get a random book and read it basically the day I got it. The stories didn't always fit together, but it was mostly the adventure, which was fun. And this actually probably contributed to my love of Star Wars Legends. I never had all that I could, and when I got older especially, it's been really fun for me now that I have the money and the time to get every book, to read them with care, and basically just to get the whole story that I didn't have as a kid. I remember one of the biggest mysteries for me was what happened with the outbound flight, and also what was in the unknown regions. Anyway, thanks for asking. If you have something you'd like me to address at the end of one of my videos like this, leave it down below with the hashtag AskEck. By the way, guys, if you enjoy this discussion of stuff from the X-Wing series, Corey from Corey Loses / Corey's Datapad and I have a Star Wars Legends podcast where we've been covering Legends books in order after Endor as sort of a book club. So far, we've got the Truce of Bakura done, as well as the first 4 X-Wing novels. With next episode, before we start on X-Wing number 5, we'll be taking a break and going back to read Plagueis. So if you're interested in that, links to everything down in the description. Thanks again for checking out this video. Thanks again to Raid for sponsoring. It really helps in the summer when views are down. And as always, guys, have a great week, and may the Force be with you.